Hey everyone, on this week's Trade to Black podcast, news from Washington pertaining to the cannabis bill COA that was finally submitted before mid-summer recess. Many investors in the industry believe this bill will not pass. Instead, they're more focused on what will happen afterwards. In addition, Cathy Wood to the rescue again. Her ARC Genomic ETF purchased another 535,000 shares of ATAI Life Sciences this week. And one can ask, what is she seeing that the average investor is not? We break it all down right now in our latest Trade to Black podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Trade to Black podcast. I am your host, Shadd Dales. As usual, if you like the content that we are producing, we love to hear your feedback, so leave a comment below. And always, if you like, again, our content, please subscribe to our channel and click on that bell for all notifications. We appreciate it so much as we try to give you insightful information pertaining to the cannabis, psychedelic, and emerging crypto industries every single week on our Trade to Black podcast. As usual, before we get into things, all views on the Trade to Black podcast and the guests on this podcast are purely opinion. You should not treat any opinions expressed by us or our guests as investment advice. The views on this podcast are solely intended to be informational and are not investment advice. Welcoming back again this week. Looks like the tan's getting darker and darker here in these summer days. We bring in the lead financial writer of the Dales Report, Benjamin A. Smith. Good day to you, and how was your week?
Had a really good week, Shadd. Lots of events in the cannabis industry, which we will talk about. It's been great, though.
Do you think it's kind of exciting? You know, we talk about this speculation of some of the news out of Washington, but I don't want to get people overly excited and like, oh my God, we've seen this time and time again. I really do think that there's a shot here that something could happen between now and the midterms. Do you think?
I would have to say no. There's probably not going to be a shot. With, not for a COA anyway. To be honest, the Cannabis Administration Opportunity Act, of course, got introduced this week as promised, as broken by Bloomberg last week. They finally delivered after the April delay, and it is what it is. It had many of the same tenets as was introduced in July 2021. A couple minor differences, but pretty much the same thing. And basically, no one believes it's going to pass. It just the Senate is split, as we know. Democrats have effectively 48 senators in the chambers, plus 2 independents that always vote for them, and it's split, and they're going to need 60 votes to pass this thing eventually. So it's going to be a tough one.
We follow this closely. We understand how this works, but for people that are trying to understand the whole Washington movement, right now it needs 60 votes for this to pass. The Democrats control the Senate, so they got 48 votes. That means 12 Republicans are going to have to come in and say yes, which obviously is 100% not going to happen. They're not going to pass anything, obviously, leading up to the midterms because they want to take control of the Senate post-midterms, correct?
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty correct. Yeah, usually in the period, especially after the summer recess, which goes into Labor Day, it starts August 5th. Up until the midterms in early November, there's not really much that gets passed. The minority party doesn't want to give the ruling party any sort of thing to campaign on. It's going to need those 10 Republican votes, to pass, because they got those 2 independents that usually vote their way. But even at that, there's at least 2 or 3, maybe even up to 5 Senate Democrats who probably won't vote for COA as is, apparently. So in reality, they probably need even more than 10 Republican votes to get this passed. So it's just too encompassing. The bill is too broad. Some of the things, some senators won't go for, such as the taxation, which goes up to 25% in year 5. It's way too much right now. Incrementalism is the way, and this is definitely not that. Chuck Schumer went for the whole enchilada on this one.
So why are they presenting this bill now? Like, this was originally supposed to be introduced back in April, but why the effort now then, even before the summer recess, if everything you're saying is accurate?
That's a very good question. I think from what I gather, they had to do some touch-ups on the legislation. It wasn't quite ready in April. There was rumors that they wanted to release it around 4/21, which is a a big date in the cannabis
Yeah, of
industry.
course.
Sorry, 420, and they couldn't quite get it there, and so they delayed it until before the summer recess, and at least they came through on that promise. So, in terms of getting that legislation out there, I think they wanted to get it before the summer recess to get it at least get it out there so that potential people voting on it would have a chance to read it over the summer recess and contemplate it. They're just basically getting it out there. But I don't think it has too much of a shot to pass. Way too broad, way too encompassing. It's going to have to be incrementalism, I think, to get anything done in this year at least.
So let's walk people through, because we touched on this again last week, and I want to further elaborate. So you're saying it won't pass, as you said, both last week and now. The back end of the statement, though, involves not necessarily about investors caring so much about the outcome of COA. It's what's going to come after the market, or excuse me, after that the market is more focused on. So you touched on this being involved in the banking bill, the NDAA. So further elaborate off of that as to why people are actually focused more on that versus COA, and how exactly that works.
Yeah, that's exactly right. In the back half, more people are focused on for sure, because the safe banking amendment was included in the National Defense Authorization Act last week. It got included in there, so it will be an amendment as part of that bill. So that would be the best shot, because the NDAA is something that has to be passed every year. It's an appropriations bill for the
Right.
Secretary, Department of Defense. It sets the budgets and appropriations of where they're going to spend their money in the U.S. military. It gets basically passed every year, and when it doesn't, sometimes it goes into late January of the next year, or February, but eventually it always gets done. So as an amendment, it has a shot because it does have ancillary correlations with national security, you could argue, because there's a cross-border issue with trafficking and so forth, and also there's a lot of support for it. The Senate Arms Committee voted in favor of it last year. They lobbied for it. Patty Murray, third-ranked Democratic senator, lobbied for it. A lot of powerful people lobbied for it, but Chuck ultimately decided not to include it. He kiboshed it because the COA was here. And now, especially if the Republicans get in win the midterms, and they don't have any downstream legislation in 2023. Right. And that was the big roadblock for safe banking to be included in the NDAA 2022. There was a legislative roadblock. If safe banking passed, Chuck Schumer's legislation had zero chance. As it turns out, it has zero chance anyway. But it won't face that same hurdle in 2023. Whether that's enough to ram it through this time is unclear. There's still a lot of roadblocks, but at least it won't have that legislative block if the Republicans, get majority of the Senate.
So when you say ram it through this year versus last year, what's the difference? Explain to me how there's a better potentially opportunity this year versus last year. Is it because, like you said, it's already been established?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, there's more pressure that have come on board this time around. We had the senator's letter of a couple weeks ago where, senators like Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Cory Booker, they all signed up for it and basically asked President Biden to deschedule cannabis. So there's a lot of pressure. There's more pressure even now than there was last year. And again, like I mentioned, especially if the Republicans win the midterms in November, they don't have any downstream legislation, right? In 2022, in November, December, when this was all being voted on and going to conference, COA was looming. COA was supposed to be introduced this year, right? So that acted as a roadblock, because if you're Chuck Schumer and you go ahead and allow SAFE and you try to push for that, then you know that your legislation is dead, because SAFE and encompassing legislation are not passing in the same year. Now, in 2023, if there's no downstream legislation, that lifts one major roadblock of allowing maybe Chuck to sign off this time, right?
Gotcha.
To pull for it, to negotiate for it, because there's no downstream legislation that could potentially block it.
Interesting. Well said. Well, I don't want, what's your thoughts on this? Because I was reading this week, the Medical Marijuana and Cannabinoid Research Expansion Act was introduced in Congress. This was on Thursday, and it's being fast-tracked with floor action on the legislation, and it's expected to happen next week. before it is potentially sent to the president's desk, which would be basically the first cannabis bill presented to the president's desk. If that were to happen, do you think the sentiment could actually change where people think, you know what, we are onto something here, and like cue the speculation on where this could go?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think what we can say for certainty is that the optics would certainly be fantastic, right? I mean, this
Yeah.
is the first ever cannabis bill to reach the president's desk, right? So obviously, if he decides to go ahead with it, even though it's just basically a research bill, more or less, to expand the research within the different channels of the U.S. government, obviously the optics are going to look really good here, and it would signal that, yeah, maybe Biden is, open to, signing other things. Now, does it have a direct correlation with what's going on in an encompassing bill like COA?
No.
I would argue that it doesn't. Obviously, it's more than an arm's length distance away from that, but it would look good that at least Biden is doing a pro cannabis legislation and signing something through, even if it is just for research.
Let's grab the table and everything is on it, wipe it clean. And somebody says, okay, plain and simple right now, if you could give me a few words on where the current state of this industry is in, and where you think, if there's ever a term or what you think how this industry will perform over the next 12 months, what do you think it would be? And the reason I ask that is because we've probably had, 18 months of downward trend within this industry. So, as I said last week, I've attended a couple Twitter spaces, and there's a lot of sentiment about people pushing strong towards focusing primarily on the tier one MSOs, the big flashy names, Curaleafs, True Leaves, GTI, those types of things. But there's so much stuff going on. Will it be listed on the big boy exchanges? Will it be legislation? If I'm really trying to keep things simple within this industry right now, what comes to mind on how you think this industry performs over the next year?
Yeah, the first word that comes to mind is complicated, because I think
Complicated?
it's complicated as from an investment thesis, because I think that the industry itself obviously is going to continue to thrive. There are some issues right now with margin compression. That is to be expected. And
I guess that's a good point. I was going to say it all depends on what I mean by the question. From an investment standpoint or a business standpoint, which again seems to be completely disconnected, but sort of cut you off. Continue.
yeah, no, you're right. And exactly, that's what it is. And that's what's frustrating to investors, right? Because from an investment standpoint, these stocks appear to be undervalued. They're trading at very, very cheap multiples, way lower than what you'd see from like retail stocks on the S&P retail ETF, for example, the average stock there. We all know what the future is. Cannabis is extremely popular. It's doing well in all these new states that are appearing, like Illinois. These non-mature states are doing really well. But from an investment point of view, there's a roadblock there, obviously, and that is that there's no liquidity in the sector. They all trade on OTC and they all trade on the CSE, and really the big money is prevented from entering the space. So, if no legislation comes through this year, if no reform, even safe banking 2023, which is very iffy right now, I must say, even though I think there's some positive leanings towards it, it's still very iffy. Then, McConnell gets in and, everything's going to be blocked for 2 years potentially. I was reading the other day, for example, that when they were going to the conference process, and safe banking was included as an amendment in the Competes Act, and when McConnell was getting his team ready for the conference to negotiate when they do the horse train about what's going to be in the bill from the Congress, from the House to the Senate version of the bill, he didn't nominate one person who was a co-sponsor for the Safe Banking Act to that conference. So that tells me that he doesn't want.
You think that was by design? You think that was by design?
Yeah, and I don't know. The answer is I'm not sure. It could have been. I mean, maybe it was random, maybe it was by design, or maybe it was just he didn't want any chance of safe being negotiated in the Competes Act, and to be show up on the final bill. So, you know, it's going to be problematic if Republicans win the Senate in November and nothing is done. And I think that's why I said complicated to start this conversation. Great industry. We all know where the future is going, but can you invest in it right now? And you could just look at the price action in MSOs this week and component stocks to get your answer. Here we have, the Senate Majority Leader, a co-sponsor for the bill, introduce it that would legalize cannabis, deschedule expungements, the whole bit, interstate commerce. And what did the market do? It went up like, a few percent, 6-7%, and now today it's down 4%. A bill like this, if people thought that they would have a chance, the market would have screamed up. But that tells you what people think of the odds. Not that high.
Yeah. Here's a question that everybody knows, that Mitch McConnell obviously is not the biggest fan, to say the least, regarding the cannabis industry. But what is it? And I know this question's been asked, but what do you think it is, why he's so against this industry and legalizing it and passing any bill? Like, I can think of a number of things. Baby boomer, Nancy Reagan era, would just say no. We need obviously new blood to look at things from a fresh perspective. Lobbyists behind the scenes that are paying him obviously not to pass this through. Like, what is it that makes this person so disdain about this industry that everybody and their dog, including powerful people on Wall Street, want this to obviously pass through? What is it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't have the definitive answer. From being in the industry for so long and researching and writing about it extensively, I think it comes down to really two things. I think there's bias about cannabis being harmful. I mean, McConnell is 80, 81, something like that. And his generation grew up with the message that, drugs were bad, that cannabis fried your mind, the whole reefer madness thing. He's not actually too far removed from maybe seeing that as a teenager growing up. And the second part would be probably, there's some lobbyist things in play, right? Maybe, I don't know if Big Pharma, particularly he's a sponsor of Big Pharma, but he could be protecting some lobbies, whether in state, whether it's the pharma industry, I'm not sure. But I would say it probably comes down to one of those two things.
We really don't know much about this as to why he's just so against it. But, I'd be curious to see just how much ties of lobbyists that he does have pertaining to this. But I definitely think it's the first thing that you'd mentioned, that he just grew up in a totally different era. And it's just frustrating, to say the least, that people that are 80, 81 years old are still making decisions on the future of our country and what's the best decision for us. And things have to change, don't they?
Oh, it's immensely frustrating. And that's probably the number one thing I see on social media, for example, or the right up there. It's the fact that there's no term limits for these people. Here we are, they can get rerun for Congress, multiple times, 8, 9, 10 times. There are no limits, right? So then you end up with people like Nancy Pelosi, who are in their late 70s.
What a joke.
Early 80s. There was a senator. Oh, it's crazy. I mean, these people are out of touch.
The money that she's made, and being asked if she provided insider information to her husband, and exited stage left faster than Usain Bolt before fielding any questions. But it doesn't matter what side of the spectrum that you're on. The system is just absolutely broke. Absolutely broke. People are fed up. You have young millennials running into courthouses in Texas talking about gun laws and stuff like that. And I know this is getting off topic, but it's just, you can just see the outbreak and cry of younger generations saying enough is enough and things have to change. But you keep the conversation going, right?
Yeah, 100%. And things do have to change. I mean, there was a great rant that came out on Twitter about 2 weeks ago. And it was basically a Democrat saying that, after the abortion thing happened or whatever, they were fundraising for this guy. They were sending fundraiser notes, and he's pointing out, he's going through the list of Democratic people, either in the House or the Senate, going, okay, this guy's making 200, Mark Byers or whatever his name is, $186 million. Nancy Pelosi, $172 million. Right down the list. I mean, these people are worth how do you make $175 million being a senator on like $180,000 a year salary, right? So there's
Yeah.
insider trading. There's, they get backroom deals, lobbyists, and money gets funneled towards them, and they control entities that benefit off the U.S. grandeur, right? Defense contracts and so forth. So people are sick of it, and especially pertaining to cannabis. Like these people are they're dinosaurs. They're protecting lobbies, and they don't get that it's a new age and that people want it. There's what 70% support for legalization of cannabis in America right now, and yet here we are, Schedule One drug, and we can't pass any sort of bill with the Democrats owning three chambers of the House, three branches of government, and it's still nothing. And then
Yeah.
when they do come up with something, it's an unpassable bill. So I mean, that's why the frustration is very palpable with investors, and it should be.
I'd love to do a deep dive on what the definition of greed means to baby boomers. Like, even when I used to work in corporations, there were guys that were making a ton of money for 30 plus years, 72, 73 years old. It's like you physically had to kick them out, give them a severance. And 12 months later, they come back, sunglasses on and shorts and flip flops, saying, I wish I would have done this 10 years ago. It's crazy. But it's like an addiction. They define themselves who they are and what they do, and they just don't know how to let go. But frustrating, to say the least. I don't want to say every baby boomer's like that, but a lot of them are. And still to this day, most corporations and government officials, especially in the U.S., they're run by baby boomers. And that's where, again, we see challenge and we need change. Next month, earnings season again for a lot of the big MSOs. August 8th is going to be when Curaleaf announces their latest earnings. So not sure how much you've actually looked into it. I know we had a little bit of dip in sales for the majority of the companies back in the spring based on supply chain issues. Do you think we see that continued trend in these reports? Because obviously the supply chain issue globally amongst so many different industries remains a big, big concern. And if so, do you think it'll have much ramification on the overall price performance?
Yeah, I expect there is still some of the headwinds that affected MSOs last quarter that Pablo Zuanich touched on, that we've covered extensively. Those are still in play. The wholesale price of cannabis, for example, is nearing $1,000 again, or has recently, and that some of that margin pressure is still apparent. One thing worth noting is that New Jersey went recreational, so I believe most of the quarter will include the revenues from the New Jersey sales, and that would include companies like TerraSend, for example, Curaleaf,
Yeah.
Green Thumb Industries, I believe. So those revenues are going to be on the books, and those are going to help sequential revenue growth for those companies. But in general, do I think are we going back to the 20%, 30% sequential quarter on quarter growth? I don't think so. I think it's going to be very modest, maybe low single digits on average, with New Jersey helping the ones who are operating there, who are got their licenses.
Let's shift to psychedelics now. I did get a chance to see some of the episodes, not everyone yet, on How to Change Your Mind, the Netflix documentary. You got to see this thing. It's really, really incredible. The first chapter is about LSD, and it's crazy. There's actually a institution in Switzerland called Exit, and it's actually to help people related to basically to end their lives, suicide, assisted suicide, and very controversial to say the least. But they were actually speaking to one person in particular who did research based off of this. But this whole fear of dying, suicidal thoughts at a microdose level, like life-changing experience for a lot of these people, and how their minds and brains were reset. I know this week that you also had a big story. And by the way, if you check this out, people at home, click on this link below, and it outlines a story that Ben did about the 5-year anniversary of Chester Bennington, the lead singer of Linkin Park. A really good story that you outlined. And some of the stuff that you were outlining was called rumination. Is that the term I'm understanding correctly?
Self rumination, yeah, where your
Rumination.
mind continues thinking about thoughts over and over.
So it's like if you have one incident, it can take you down to that same dark place, and it just continues that groove that basically that Peyton was actually educating from Numinous last week on how there's certain grooves that are set within the brain and can take you back to that same thought time and time again, and then it starts to manifest more and more, and something so small could become something so big and overwhelming for a lot of people, which is, in a nutshell, mental health. But fascinating story to say the least. But if you get a chance, I highly recommend obviously seeing it, because I think in a lot of ways what it's done, which was badly needed, is to bring some attention to this industry once again, because it's, polarizing, let's say 2 years ago, right around when Compass went public. But, looking back to like last November since then, it's definitely been an industry that people have forgotten about, it seems like.
Yeah, it was definitely an eye opener for me, researching the story, because I've always been sort of a peripheral Linkin Park fan, like not hardcore, but I like their music or whatever. I never really gave it too much thought, but doing the research on it, it was amazing to see, and reviewing some of the songs and the lyrics of some of the songs, very dark. And Chester Bennington was
What'd you
actually
find?
known for being,
Like, what,
1 minute he'll just speak like in an angelic voice, very calming, soothing, and then he was known for that pounding, pulsing beat where it just shifts on a dime and it goes into this dark place. And I think a lot of the songs which he mostly wrote for that band were because this is what he was
yeah.
feeling, because he had trauma growing up. He was, there's some sexual abuse, unfortunately. There was some bullying in high school that he experienced. And the big takeaway is like, and he said in interviews that just because you're famous doesn't mean you're going to be happy, right? It doesn't guarantee anything. It just because of his early childhood trauma, he had these self-rumination where he was just repeating all these negative cycles of thoughts. And he said that if he didn't keep at it, if he didn't always try to control it, it would just dominate him. And he'd go through spells where he would just, be drinking in the house and turn into a monster and be suicidal. So, yeah, I'm glad he brought the awareness, because he was very open publicly. And this is a huge problem in society right now. And thankfully, the psychedelics industry, I think, is on the cusp, or it's getting there, critical mass of being able to bring therapeutics that are helping these people. And that's very important. That's why I'm very excited about the
I'm
industry.
glad that you pulled that information out, because, man, do we live in a society right now that's so fascist, and it's like fame and fortune is going to bring you happiness, and everybody just wants so much attention brought on themselves and be noticed by the click-throughs, the views, and all that sort of stuff when it comes to social media. And it's incredible when you look at some of these people. I can't think of a more addictive drug than fame. Fame would be a very addictive drug. And
And it could be very harmful too. If you mix fame with pain, emotional pain, the
right.
stress, just fame normal times with normal people. Now, just picture trying to live up to that and having the stress of having a bad background where you think very bad thoughts about yourself. And that's what happened with Chester. It became so overwhelming that at some point he just decided that, you know what, I'm going to go back and tell people I'm working at home, and, make an unfortunate decision, right?
Something important that you outlined too in the story was the night before, a lot of his close friends and family that were with him noticed that he was very happy and lovable and all that sort of stuff, and seemed like in a good set, frame of mind. And it's funny, I remember watching the documentary about Avicii's life as well. And a lot of people were saying the same thing. He was down in the Galapagos, sorry, how do you pronounce it? Galapagos Island.
Galapagos?
Yeah, islands. And, he was going down there to start write new songs, start new music, start a new album. Seemed like a good frame of mind, only to find out, obviously, his passing. And it's just incredible, the people that struggle, obviously, with depression, anxiety. I think they try even that much harder to make people really, really happy, because they're trying to obviously cope and battle with their demons. But man, what a tough, sad story. And I know it was a bad place for him, because he lost a close friend a couple months in advance, and Chris Cornell, that passed away in Detroit earlier that year. But when
Yeah,
you
Kurt Cobain. There's been a few of
yeah,
them. Unfortunately, a lot of these singers, they use their music as an outlet, and they want to
100%.
keep working, because if they're left to their own devices and they just go on vacation and sit on a beach, the rumination in their mind just keeps going. They need to keep occupied. And Chester kind of mentioned this a lot of times. And it's so sad to see that trauma, we need to have a better way of fixing trauma. I don't know if he was ever clinically diagnosed. I was unable to uncover that. There's probably obviously sealed medical records, but it was so apparent that he had an issue. And whatever antidepressants, he probably would have tried them, traditional ones, they didn't work. So we need a better solution.
100%. What was the big, like as you were writing out this story and doing the research, what's the one thing that really grabbed your attention when doing the research that that taught you something about mental health and really about his story? Is there something that sticks out?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it was probably about how open he was. He was very open about his condition. He was a very public guy. He had no problem going on interviews, and he was interviewed quite a lot. And he was very open about his depression, unlike some people who keep it closed. He was just open about how, he was messed up, or the pain that he was feeling about having to keep it under control. And when he did these interviews, he seemed very normal. It didn't seem like there was overt pain there or whatever. He just kind of said it like it was. And that's why I think he played a big part in helping what we see today, the openness about mental health discussion. 5 years ago, it was still kind of on the fence. It's been like a work in progress. But now today, we have Bell Talk, people talk about it openly. And I think Chester Bennington, because of his profile and the way he was so open about it publicly, I think that went a long way to bringing the issue to the forefront, and in a way that now it's all mainstream today.
Yeah, well, I think the Bell Let's Talk was a great initiative, but it's become very controversial in the last couple of years because there's a lot of talk and no action, especially with a way they've kind of demonstrated, I think, in the last few years with the amount of job cuts. And still a lot of people seem like they're pretty stressed out in the work environment, but I don't know if that's accurate. So, I can't really comment and make that a statement, but it just seems like there's a lot of feedback on people thinking that there needs to be more than change than just bringing awareness like one day of the week. The thing that I find interesting about this, though, is once you've addressed a situation and shared it with somebody, and when I hear about his story a lot, and I think this is what I'm learning through the psychedelic industry, is that if you've had a horrific upbringing or something catastrophic has happened to you and you go through this kind of pain, it's like the reset of the mind suddenly says, okay, I've shared that. I've dealt with that. Now I can actually move on from that and start thinking about different thoughts that create different neurons to connect. And it's like a whole new way of thinking. And what I mean by that is like, okay, I've had a horrific upbringing. How this has affected me. Or now it's like, I want to start thinking in a different shed of light, so to speak, which is like, I've accepted it. I've moved on. I'm in a good place now. This is who I am today. And these are the differences that I'm making in life. And a lot of the times when people are addictive, it's like the same habit over and over, and it just blows up and manifests itself. But from what I'm learning within the psychedelic industry, it's like acceptance, never forget, but now moving on with your life and how you're affected today, which creates a whole totally different mindset. And that's where it's going and helping people. And that's really kind of the next step that people have to take when it's related to something catastrophic, addiction, all those sorts of things, because we always want to do what we know best, and change can be overwhelming for some people, don't you think?
Yes, I do. And you hit the nail on the head earlier in that statement. It was that psychedelics, the power of them is allowing to connect a new neural footprint.
Right.
Unlike traditional psychedelics, which try to boost serotonin or boost other sort of neuron or receptors in the brain and try to get more activity in those, psychedelics actually create new neural paths, right? And through those new neural paths, you create new connections to allow you to disassociate like the old ways of thinking and just try to cover that with like an SSRI or whatnot, and actually create new pathways. And the trip allows them to become active, and then you basically rewire your brain in a lot of ways. So that's why I'm excited about the industry, because I've read a lot of the research, and I think that pathway, and not just sort of masking it by increasing or decreasing serotonin, actually creating the new pathways is showing a lot of promise to rewire the brain and changing things, addictive ways or depressionary ways that were associated with old ways of thinking, if that 100%. Makes sense.
One last thing I wanted to touch on. It seems like we're bringing this up every single week. Cathy Wood. every week, Cathy would, and her ARC Genomic ETF. Each week, they just continue to buy up ATAI Life Sciences. They added another 535,188 shares this week, a record high 0.41% fund allocation. I ask this question a lot, but if you were in the room with Cathy Wood, what do you think she'd say to you on what she's seeing that the average investor's not?
I think she's seen a lot of value here. I mean, if you look at ATAI, it IPO'd, I forget the IPO price, so 11 or 12, something like that, and now it's trading at 4. And there's been no material decrease in performance. They're doing everything that they set out to do. They had a big cash hoard out front, and they're executing the research. They're hitting their milestones, as we saw in their last financial results. And there's probably, I would think that she sees value here at this price as a long-term play, given the way the psychedelics industry is going. So it's great to see. Yeah, another 535,000 shares, record high, 0.41% fund allocation. For a long time, that allocation bounced between, 0.24 and 0.28%. So in the last 2 weeks, it's gone up to 0.38 and now 0.41. So progressively, ATAI is becoming a bigger percentage of the fund, and I wouldn't ultimately be surprised if that went up to like the 1% range. And it's really good to see. It means she has a lot of confidence of where the industry is going.
Yeah, what an opportunity it is. It's just a complete understanding of being cashed up and diversification. If I can share anything to people that are interested in this space when entering in, you got to stay away from companies that have one compound, one trial, and a couple $1 million raised, and they're barely making payments. Drug development takes years, and it's hundreds of millions of dollars. And those are the things that you have to look for. And outside of drug development, you look at the health wellness companies who have well-sustained models when it comes to a lot of clinics. Most importantly, too, that are not burning cash and bleeding cash. I think those are going to actually have immediate short-term growth opportunities. There's only a few. I do know, like the back end, there's a few companies that have this model, but their business is still in complete disarray. So at the end of the day, do your due diligence as usual. And most importantly, just have a better understanding of what this industry can present for you. Anyway, that's it, buddy. You're off next week. By the way, for all of you watching, we appreciate you listening in here today. And as usual, if you like what you saw, leave a comment below. What do you think? What does Cathy Wood like about ATAI Life Sciences? What do you like about ATAI Life Sciences? And more importantly, this industry? Feel free to leave a comment below. And as well, we very much appreciate if you subscribe to your channel. We'll continue to produce great content. And as well, click on that bell for all notifications as we give you a lot of insight with these new emerging industries led by our lead financial writer, Benjamin A. Smith. Again, as I was saying, you're on vacation next week. Enjoy your time off. Where's the destination, buddy?
Destination is in the good old province of Quebec. It's a little resort there that we're going to check out. I've never been to Quebec City. It's close by. So, we're gonna see how it goes.
Well, have fun, drive safe, and enjoy this weather, because here in Canada, before we know, the leaves will turn red.
Oh yeah, this time of year, I'm always enjoying the weather.
Yeah.
I mean, it's we only have 4 or 5 months.
All it takes is that first person to say, "Yeah, I was driving up north like August 10th and noticed that there was a leaf color change," and it's just immediately you're on the clock. Falls around.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyways, appreciate the time and enjoy your week, and we'll catch up with you in a couple weeks again, okay? Hey, everyone. Thanks for watching. And if you like this video, wait until you see what we have next. Some of the best thought leaders in the verticals that we cover, from cannabis and psychedelics to cryptos and NFTs and sports wagering. So if you want to learn more, make sure to click on that bell for all notifications, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.